to another episode of Embracing Wisdom with Stacie. And I decided to dive a little bit further into this topic of, is yoga exercise? What is yoga? And specifically, how is it that when somebody has physical challenges or cognitive challenges, which is primarily the people that I teach to, how do they practice yoga? And I'll tell you how they practice yoga. They are guided to really think about the other spokes of that wheel that we talked about on that podcast about, is yoga exercise? So when we think about the bicycle wheel that we know of as yoga, there are 8 spokes that make up that wheel. And one of those spokes is asana or posture, one of them. The other 7 bicycle spokes really are principles and guidelines of how we live a life that is walking towards grace, that is walking towards enlightenment, that is truly living our best life. And so when I work with somebody who is paralyzed, I'm really thinking more about the other 7 spokes than I am about posture or asana for this individual. So I want to break down one of the spokes of the bicycle wheel of yoga, which is the yamas. The yamas are ethics, principles, guidelines. I don't want to say rules, but they're just sort of these principles in which we show up in the world as it relates to other people. Of course, we apply the yamas to ourselves as well, but we're really looking at how do we interact with the world through these guidelines. So the first guideline that you hear most often when we think about yoga and have this, this preconceived notion that if you practice yoga, you teach yoga, you're a yogi, you have to be a vegetarian. That's because this principle, which is called ahimsa, which means non-harming, lends itself to think that we should not harm animals or other people or spiders or snakes. Now, that can be a very literal definition of ahimsa, but it's really looking at nonviolence in the terms of our thoughts, our actions. If what we do in the world could harm somebody else or harm nature, that's interacting with the greater, with the world. So am I being violent to the planet when I throw trash out on the street out of my car window? Absolutely. Am I being harming to the planet if I waste water? Absolutely. If I judge someone else because of their experience that I know nothing about, that's a thought that is violent. Okay, so ahimsa, nonviolence, is really way more than being vegetarian. I've tried it. I've been there. It wasn't for my body. If it works for you, that's great. But as a brand new yogi 20 years ago, I thought that's what it meant. And it really is much more than that. So when we think about teaching ahimsa, it starts with the thoughts. Are our thoughts about ourselves, about other people? Are they violent? Are they hurtful? Are they hateful? Then we need to nip that, right? We need to nip that in the bud. And then, are my actions violent? Am I reacting to something where I could be responding? And responding is a much gentler, nicer, easy way to deal with life's challenges. So first principle of the yamas is ahimsa, non-violence or non-harming. This next one, called asteya, which means non-stealing. Of course, we're not going to go steal. Like, it's more than um, stealing, an object from somebody. Of course, we're not going to steal. We're good people, but it's not necessarily stealing material things. It's stealing somebody's pain, somebody's emotion, somebody's grief. And so this shows up in you meet with somebody on a trail and you're walking down a path and they look sad. And so you say, "Hey, good morning." And that person says something like, "It's a terrible morning. My dog just died." And you say, "Oh, that happened to me and it was terrible." You just stole that person's grief. You just stole that person's sadness to make it about yourself. It also comes when we steal somebody's joy and celebration, like their successes. We want to divert our attention away from their success to our own or comparing them. That's a form of stealing. But it also has to do with the stealing of natural resources, again, wasting the water. I mean, that can be interpreted as violent because it's going to someday, trickle down, pardon the pun, to not having enough for other people, which is violent, taking, stealing. They kind of go hand in hand in some cases, but it also means, there's this word out there called appropriation, where we we might steal somebody's deeply important ethics, religious, otherwise, and interpret it as our own. That's a form of stealing. So I'm very careful as a yoga teacher, um, to steal or appropriate some of the principles in an unhealthy way or a way that's unethical. So I have a dear friend who grew up in India, born as an Indian man in India, has been a yogi since forever. He doesn't remember a time that he wasn't putting all of these philosophies and asana into his daily life. And I was very hesitant to welcome this person in because I felt like the Western side of me as a yoga teacher is very fraudulent to the truth of yoga. And I didn't want to appropriate, I didn't want to offend him. So we've had many conversations about that, and he's very open about the difference between true yoga that is taught and embodied in that culture versus what we've done to it in America. And he laughs at it and, finds humor in it, but it's something that we really need to think about when we're thinking about non-stealing. Are we stealing somebody's joy? Are we stealing somebody's pain? Are we stealing somebody's time? If I say I'm going to be somewhere at a certain time, I try most the hardest I can to be on time, because otherwise I'm stealing that person's time. I'm not showing them that they're as valuable as whatever caused me to be delayed. Life happens, but for a general rule, I try to really honor somebody's time. All right, the third yama is truthfulness, satya, truthfulness. And this is in our words. Do we exaggerate the truth? Do we exaggerate a story to make it sound better? That is a violation of this ethical principle. Are our thoughts truthful? Or are we making up a story about somebody else or a situation and reasoning with it to make ourselves feel better? And then, of course, truthfulness in our actions. And this is really, it shows up in the yoga asana part where we're in a class and we are not being truthful with ourselves about our own limitations or our own body. And so we push beyond our truth, and that's where we have injuries. So although the yamas are really geared towards our interactions with other people, we also have to practice that truthfulness within ourselves, being honest with ourselves, especially when it comes to practicing asana. Okay, the fourth one, aparigraha. Parigraha is greed. It's basically greed, this possessiveness we have on things and accumulating things, and like clutter. How much do we have? And then there's that material side, and then it's this possessiveness on expectations and attachments to the way we think life should be, the way that we think somebody should be, the way that we think our life should be. That greed and possessiveness of expectations can get us into big trouble. And if we can drop our expectations in a yoga pose, in an asana, about what it's supposed to look like, then all of a sudden we have freedom, right? And so when I'm working with somebody whose body is paralyzed, there's a huge opportunity to let go of that need for perfection when really they're just wanting to experience their body alive. So it's a good one to practice when you think about Do you have to have that thing? Do you have to have that thing? And I find myself personally, I go through these flows of like Amazon shopping, and then I don't need that. Amazon shopping, I don't need that. And just in the last 2 days, I've returned 3 items that I felt I needed, but I really didn't. I really didn't. I make do with what I have. And so having this principle to really like not possess people, not possess things, not possess experiences, it has to be a certain way. And instead, just sort of kind of coming to that realization that I have enough and being grateful, and it is what it is. And then the final yama in this first spoke of yoga is called brahmacharya. And way back in the beginning of time, when yoga was discovered, evolving, becoming, brahmacharya was really designed for celibacy. Because way back then, females weren't really allowed to practice yoga. It was a very much male driven thing. It was part of just culture. It's what you did. And so some interpretations of brahmacharya is celibacy or fidelity, but it's really more than that. It's been understood over thousands of years that it's really more a conservation of our energy. What are we putting our energy into? Are we distracted energy wise by a thing, by an expectation, by a person, by our past, by our future? Are we putting so much energy into something outside of ourselves that we've lost the sense of moderation? Maybe it's a hobby that we have that it's just all consuming of us. And if you saw my little blog post and podcast too that went along with just that monocular vision, just tuning into one thing and not seeing the greater thing. And so it's the willingness to conserve energy, to be okay with being at ease and at rest, and to be moderate in what we do. And this is a hard one for me. When I commit, I commit, and I want to go, 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 go. But like pulling back the reins and saying, okay, I don't have to do that much of that activity. I can do it in moderation. And then that lanes itself into the yoga practice on the mat. The asana is like moderation. Do I want that hot yoga 5 times a week because it does something amazing? Yes, I've been there, but it destroyed my physical body. And so moderation. Could I do a hot yoga class once a week, once every couple of weeks? Absolutely. Do I need to do it every day? Sometimes twice a day? Heck no. So conservation of energy. So these yamas are really these beautiful designed sort of principles of how do we interact with the world through nonviolence, non-stealing, truthfulness, non-greed or possessiveness, and moderation. Simple, right? Simple. Is that yoga? Absolutely. So when I'm teaching yoga to somebody whose body is not able to get on the floor and do asana, we talk about these things. We talk about their experience with a traumatic brain injury, and where's their truth? Where's their truth in their spirit? Where are they being violent in their thoughts when they look at their body and they see that it's changed? Are they being kind to themselves and kind to the people that they live with and to the staff, or is there so much? So we work through these principles. We work through stealing. We work through energy. We work through possessiveness. We work through all of these principles. And then the next spoke of the wheel are the niyamas, which is how we relate to ourselves. So yamas are sort of how we broadly relate to the world. Niyamas, which we'll get to at some point, are how we relate to ourselves. So yes, there's so much to say about this. And when people say, how do you teach yoga to people with dementia and traumatic brain injuries? This is what we're talking about. Yes, I move their body, but as I move their body and I'm stretching their arm and I'm holding it for them and I'm circling it for them, I ask them these questions. You have to tell me if this harms you, if it hurts you, that's truth, that's nonviolence. If they're pushing so hard and yanking their arm in a violent way to get it to stretch, we back up a little bit and we talk about ahimsa, we talk about nonviolence. So that's a lot of information. One spoke, yamas. What we talked about a couple weeks ago was asanas or posture. We're going to keep diving into this. I'm going to dabble it in a little bit at a time through the podcast. I have great news. I work with a young woman. She is in her early 30s and she had a stroke, and her life is very, very different. And she's very angry and she's very sad. And she's also very resilient and very determined. And she agreed to be interviewed for the podcast. So I'm going to talk to her in a couple weeks. I'm formulating the questions and she's willing to show up. So how cool is that? So stay tuned for that. And I will see you. When will I see you? I'll see you next week. Another episode coming up. And shoot me some questions if you have questions about it. I decided to record today's podcast in my office versus my studio because it's super sunny out there and the lights just weren't right. And so my little cat Leo, who shows up for everything, is outside the door. And apologies for his very vocal determination to get in here. So I will see you next week. Another episode coming up, and hop on to my 30 days of yoga. We're over halfway through the 30 days. It's 5, 15, 10 minutes, 20 minutes maybe a day. You can certainly catch up. There's all styles of yoga being offered, and a lot of these principles are being woven into the practice. So if you're not sure how to connect the dots between what we know in our Western world as physical yoga with really the principles, ethical guidelines of yoga, try a few episodes of the 30 days of yoga and just see how it all connects. So I'll see you soon and take care. Have a great week.